is the Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for joining us. We're continuing the Shaping Funding and MedTech Insights from Industry Insiders webinar by Keiretsu Forum. In this segment, we talked about the changing funding landscape. We looked at the shift in the funding environment over the past 3 years and its impact on early-stage MedTech companies. We discussed navigating the challenges and seizing the opportunities, looking at the impact of AI and digital health devices on the MedTech industry. I hope you enjoy this episode. Well, let's dive into that topic a little bit more and explore the shift in the funding environment over the past 3 years and the impact it's had on the MedTech companies. And let's talk about those different paths of incubators, accelerators, data initiatives, and helping startups navigate those challenges and different revenue models, sales, licensing, and others of the medical device technologies. So with that, let's kick off with Paul. What do you see out there in the changing funding landscape, and what are people doing to negotiate that?
I touched on this in my earlier comments, but I guess let me step back. Lishan touched on it, and Brianna certainly mentioned it as well. The money is a lot harder to get these days than it was. And couple that with strategics, the bigger strategics want you to take it further. They want you to not only get it through the regulatory clearance process, but they want you to show uptake in the market. So that requires significant capital and time often, right? And so, where we come in, at Hatch Medical, what we've done is work with some of our client companies to come up with some unique commercialization strategies, which it's, whether it's partnering with a smaller or mid-sized company who wants access to that technology and is willing to, instead of writing, an 8-figure check at deal closing, maybe it's, hey, we'll do the regulatory piece. We'll help you with supply chain and enable you to gain access to our suppliers so you can take advantage of economies of scale. There's some really, interesting and unique ways that you can approach it. Not every company is open to that. A lot of them are, still focused on, hey, get it in the market, generate the revenue, and then we'll talk. But I think it was it Thomas Edison that said necessity is the mother of invention. I think that and I see Todd nodding, I hope I got that right. So, that's the case, right? I mean, in these difficult times, you've got to be creative with, how you go about doing business. And so, I would credit Lishan with this. Lishan, you won't pat yourself too hard on the back, I know, because you're a humble guy, but, you guys have raised over $300 million. And that didn't happen easily, right? But yet, here you are, you're in a situation, you've commercialized several technologies, other publicly traded companies under your PavMed group, but you're also recognizing, hey, this is a unique, environment. And can we work with somebody like Hatch Medical, a smaller company, to be nimble and creative and come up with another way to get some of our technologies commercialized? And so, obviously, I think you made the right decision in working with us. But
we do too. We agree.
Your creativity and thinking about, hey, how do we do this? Because it's not easy, and it's not, kind of the clear-cut path that it used to be.
Yeah, it's about being nimble. I think you're right.
Right. Well, Todd, you're a successful CEO. How do you handle this new funding environment we're in?
So I'm going to start off with an analogy because I have to do it because I have to do it at almost every meeting, that this is not rocket science because I used to launch rockets in spacecraft. And I used to have an analogy over the last 20 years of doing this was raising money is like finding water on the moon. You believe it's there. And you go there and you go get it. Now the bigger and harder question is how do I get to the moon? Where is the moon? Who is out there? So you really have to be more and more creative in what you do and the money you have. So first, I always prepare whenever I start a company, prepare for nuclear winter, which means I have nothing. What can I do and get things done on the cheap that's going to raise my value and bring in and attract investors. Because what I truly believe is good investments get funded, whether in downturns or upturns.
That's
And,
absolutely true. Sorry,
and
that's absolutely true.
and I have. And Brianna, I used to be one of these Booz Allen management consultant guys until I said, oh, I could go do this by myself. And a lot of hair later, less, and a lot of gray, and a lot of war scars is we have to understand the funding environment, but we also have to understand the bigger company environment. What are we creating that becomes accretive to them? And if you're going to be exiting to J&J or Medtronic and you have $50 million in revenues and you might grow to 100 million, you're sort of a rounding error on the PE of that stock. So we have to start creating value for us for certain target audiences, but also go to those investors who will get us to those big inflection points. How do we de-risk milestones? For a small company in my space right now, it was nail down the supply chain, nail down the regulatory pathway, and nail down reimbursement. Having those made the investor conversations a lot easier. Still pretty hard, but a little bit easier. And we have to prepare also for those early questions we get from investors. Where are you going to exit? What does that look like? How are you going to be accretive right away to a company? And what do you have that will change it? So the environment of having 50 million revenues, again, is very difficult for a large company to say, I'm going to acquire you for $50 million and you're going to put $50 million revenues. That can't happen. So we have to be very selective in how we pick money, be very efficient. And I've run all virtual pharmas and virtual device companies. I have no property, plant, and equipment. Get to the experts, get it in their hands. It might feel a little bit more expensive, but it's a lot cheaper in the long run. And then de-risk your developments as you go. Do simple goals, do simple 3D printing, leverage a little bit of technology of AI. And all those make the funding a little bit easier, but you have to go out there and assume right now, if you're going to raise money somewhere, let's say you want to raise 1 million, that's one set of audiences, but you're not going to VC unless you're probably talking 15, 20, or $30 million at this point, because small companies don't go in there and get funded right away with Series A unless they have a gajillion dollar market potential and value. So be heads up on what you have, and then eventually what's needed at the end. And then finally, I want to add, for the M&A environments, we should all plan as we grow, how do we become a sustainable business? Because that's when you get acquired. Is not do you prepare for that quick exit at phase 1 or quick exit at phase 2 or quick exit at 5, 10K, because you need to create a sustainable business that produces revenues and strong EBITDA margins.
Great
It's-
advice.
Amen.
It's
Hey,
much better.
hey,
It's much better to be bought than sold, as they say.
Correct.
Yes.
well, great. Well, Dr. Ackewald, you're also a successful CEO and entrepreneur. How are you managing through this process?
Yeah, I'd like to echo one really important thing that Todd said that I think people, again, in our part of the ecosystem don't appreciate enough. Todd, you mentioned that the acquiring company needs to see a path towards that asset being accretive. It's, as you said, 50 million is a lot of revenue for but as you pointed out, if you're a $60 billion company, it doesn't change your PE. That's what drives your shareholder value and so forth. And so, but there are strategic acquirers that are further down the food chain. Our first company, Vortex Medical, was acquired by AngioDynamics 10, 11 years ago. And now the product that we sold to them, they paid 55 million for it, is one of their leading, it's their highest margin product, and it actually had an accretive impact. I think they might have, done things a little differently, but you all feel that when you've handed over your technology. So the target strategics don't have to be the Medtronics, the J&Js, the Strykers of the world. There are the AngioDynamics and the Merits and other companies that are looking to grow, where your asset at your stage can have an impact. That's one point. That just to echo that. One other point, which I think you briefly mentioned, is sort of the role of this whole other ecosystem of incubators and accelerators and state. And I actually have I don't want to be the cynic in all of this, but I have some thoughts about that, because I get asked a lot since it's been about 12 years since I gave up my scalpel and I've been doing this. I get asked to sort of talk a lot, both in talks, but as well as one-on-one advice to early stage entrepreneurs, particularly physician entrepreneurs. And what troubles me is that there are plenty. I'm not sort of denigrating accelerators or incubators, but there's a lot of them out there. And there's sort of this seduction to say, hey, well, Dr. So-and-so or engineer so-and-so who's got this really cool idea, come with us. We'll park you we'll give you a nice little space in our facility, and we'll connect you whatever. In the meantime, you've raised money and we're charging you, off the top, or there, come and participate in our competition and you get some big check with a nice thing. You got $50,000 because you came in second. The reason I bring that up is that it's just a word of caution. Again, I'm not downplaying. There are many out there that do good work that advance it, but there are people that I talked to 7 years ago, early stage entrepreneurs, who's basically spent the last 7 years just doing one competition after another and getting the $50,000 check here and that, and they post it on their LinkedIn, and it almost becomes an end in of itself, as opposed to sort of a stepping stone to the next, to a real round of financing, an angel round or subsequent to that. And so that's something that it's a seduction that I would encourage early stage entrepreneurs to just be careful and be wary about, and see it as a stepping stone, not an end of itself.
Great advice. And Brianna, what are you seeing from your perspective?
Well, thank you, Dr. Akalon, for pointing that out. So I'm going to dovetail off of that a bit further, because it really comes down to both the entrepreneurs and the investors. And Paul touched on it with partnerships. Todd touched on it with stretching the dollar and really being capital efficient in how you run your company, and that companies buy companies that are profitable. Like that, at the end of the day, burning endless amounts of cash does not make you attractive to acquirers, and acquirers don't want to pay a really high dollar. They also want a deal. So we need to keep that in mind as we look at it, but really building the company marketing plan and having entrepreneurs build that and having investors diligence it. Now, this is not selling your product. This is selling your company. So understanding who are the early investors? Is it an accelerator? Is that the best one for you there? Who are the people in this space that can be on your cap table, that are the foundation of your company to really help take it to the next stage, that you can lean on for support? And that's something Keiretsu does really well, is being able to build out those cap tables of those supporters that can lean in, they can help, and they're with you through the good and the bad if you communicate and actually let them know what's going on, because everybody wants things to be successful if they choose to invest. But identifying those early investors, how much of the company do you want to sell? How much capital is it going to take you to get to those milestones, those simple milestones that Todd talked about? And at each stage, and build from the end backwards. So if you want to be 15 million and selling to J&J, awesome. Let's build backwards and how you get there and how you actually sell up your company at each round that you're doing it. And then make sure you don't get hosed in the A, B, and C rounds, because let's be real, that's where founders screw themselves, and they end up screwing us along with it, us early stage investors, because they have high burn rates. They're growing, they've got traction, they need that money. And then that VC comes in and they, undercut the deal, and it hurts us. We get diluted down. And the founder, I've seen so many founders exit companies and barely make anything because that happens. So it's really identifying, and I forget who touched on it at the beginning. You got to identify which is the best route. And this is for us as investors to do as the companies are investing. When I talk to a company, they're like, oh, I'm going to go do a 15 million VC round, or I'm going to go raise a 50 million VC round. I'm like, great, not for me, right? I am not interested in investing in that company, because there's just no way I'm going to make any money. Like I can't turn that around and like invest in new deals. And so understanding what their pathway is and how it fits with your investment thesis and how you can lean in and support, and that they've actually thought about it. Because, like I said, the last 14 years of free money and 0% interest rates has just led to, it all coming in. And I get, 20 emails a day from companies basically seeing me as money. They've not looked at what I do. They have not researched what I fund, nothing. And I'm just money, and I'm not money. I am a partner. And so how do we build those partnerships and expand on that in this capital environment? Because this capital environment has happened before. It happened after the dot-com bust in 2000, followed quickly by 9/11, the Iraq War, the financial correction in 2008. And you can look at the companies that started in those time periods, and they are leaders today. So if you're able to survive and you find the investors who are willing to take the risks now in you, you can really do amazing things. The companies that have been just going with free cash for the last 5 years, those are the ones that we're going to be seeing collapse. And the other thing I remind companies too in this environment is that 54,000 companies this year, that was in a Q1 report of PitchBook, are raising capital. 54,000. So you're in competition with all of them. So why not just give the investors what they want to hear instead of, trying to bolster up what you're selling? Oh, we're revolutionizing this and we've got this, adding in all the adjectives and the adverbs. Like, if you want to poke the bear with me, that is one way to do it. I will disregard a presentation almost immediately if it's just a whole bunch of adjectives and fluff, because it's just not real. It's just not a real presentation. So get down to the nitty gritty and really what it is and what you need and who these partners are. It's about to get harder because I've actually talked to investors this year, and I don't know about Paul or Todd or Dr. Eklong and what they've seen, but there's a lot of companies that are also failing. And then we're going to start seeing those VCs start marketing down their portfolios. And so as people lose money in this space because they invested at really high valuations with crappy deal terms in 21 and 2020, it's going to make it even tougher moving into not only an election year and everything else going on in the world. So you've got to find those people who can, look beyond all of the fear-driven environment and really see the opportunity to do great things with the work that we're doing.
Right. Well, as we navigate these uncertain times, there's also new opportunities out there on the market and the technology front. In particular, AI has come up and has made a big impact on many sectors, including digital health devices in the MedTech industry. Let's talk about that and what opportunities we see out there. Dr. Aklog, how do you see AI and new technologies impacting your space?
Like I said at the beginning, the cool thing is that, AI it used to be, I guess, called machine learning more. It's a little bit hard to get through some of the gobbledygook, in terms of the terminology. But MedTech is well positioned to utilize AI because of that prior history. And it's just, we have devices and technologies that are already integrated, often with platforms where having some additional intelligence or pattern recognition or other elements can enhance the value of the products. I think we're really well positioned to do so. One thing to be careful about with that is the regulatory side, where the traditional structures at FDA are not designed for that. They're not designed for learning algorithms, right? You do your 510 every time you're upgrading your product. In 2 or 3 years, you do another 510K. But that's not how AI-enabled products work, right? They're in sort of continuous learning mode, and you may have 10 iterations in a year. The good news, as I said at the beginning, and I get some of this perspective from AdvaMed, is that FDA actually realizes that, and they're further ahead of the game than you might think, certainly compared to the reimbursement side, where it's unclear how AI-enabled technologies are going to be, where that extra value that comes from the AI is going to be reflected. So, I think we're in great position. I think it's also, the opportunity is also linked to the fact that we're in the business of supporting a healthcare delivery system, right? We know our technology is sort of there in the furtherance of patient care, and AI is definitely that. There it's new, right? There it is actually having an impact. So all of these like clinical decision support systems and algorithms of care and more sort of continuous, as I mentioned earlier, more continuous monitoring of patients. One of PAVmed has a subsidiary called Veris Health, which is looking to enhance cancer care with an implantable port that has remote patient monitoring. And so a cancer patient is getting chemotherapy is essentially never left. It's as if they've never left. There's no gap there. You're not sort of saying, oh, I hope this patient doesn't end up coming back in the emergency room with sepsis. You know exactly what's going on with their vital signs. So being able to take a technology like that, a digital health platform like that, that's married to a MedTech device, and then insert that into care pathways and say, okay, now we have an entirely new care pathway of how we're going to take care of someone in a bone marrow unit. And that includes when they get discharged, these new data points are coming in. You can come up with digital biomarkers and all sorts of sophisticated ways to enhance that care. So I think we're just really well positioned to do so. To do so, I think maybe echoing one of Brianna's points, I think one thing people should be careful about is just sort of saying AI. It's like, it used to be blockchain. Right now, it's just using the term AI. Use it if it's real, if it actually, and if it's machine learning, then call it machine learning. It doesn't matter. Just say what don't try to just use the buzzwords. Actually show how these modern tools are helping you improve the product and how it'll help, improve the care of patients at the end of the day.
Good points. And Paul, what's your take on this topic?
Yeah. So, I'm in the medical device space for a reason. I like predictable 510 devices. I know what the pathway is. And as Lishan mentioned, with AI, it's moving so fast. And so it's a little bit, it's hard to predict, of course, right? So what's going to happen? What is the FDA going to do? How are they going to look at things? I'll give you an example. I have a good friend of mine. We worked together years ago at CR Bard back in the day. And offices were next to each other, and we both we had this entrepreneurial itch that needed to be scratched, right? He went health IT space route. I went traditional medical device. I think he's on his third or fourth exit at this point, but he's got an AI company, and we're talking about working together on some projects. And it's going so fast that it's almost hard for them to keep up with what they're doing. It's amazing. They came up with a sales training AI enabled model to help train their sales team because they were struggling. And what they found is that through using this new tool that they developed just for their sales team, that sales aid is now more valuable than the AI company that they created. So I don't know if that made sense, but it's amazing the direction that you're seeing companies go that are enabling, AI as part of their, true AI as part of their company. And you see they're spinning out all sorts of opportunities. And I think it's just hard for so many of them to keep up with. And again, I'm, sort of a traditional head down, AI, I better know a little bit about it. But, it's always incorporating software into medical devices has always scared me, because you have to plant your flag at some point and then commercialize. And by the time you end up commercializing, there's already been multiple advances on the software that's powering your technology. And so that's where I'm unsure how this all gets handled and sorted out down the road from an AI standpoint.
But the good news with that, Paul, is that FDA has sort of figured that out. So you can.
Oh, no, that's good.
It's figuring it out. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but you don't have to do a 510K every time there are ways to present the software portion of your software as a medical device, or even just the software support, where you can build in a change plan. Like you can say, okay, we're going to take it from here to here. And as long as the iterative improvements are within some well-defined scope, then you can just do that maybe with a letter to file or something like that. So again, I'm surprised that the FDA has been forward thinking about that, but it's addresses that particular thing.
It's good to know
that. Jump in, Hal. I just thought
it's good to know that they're about that. It is a little, I've seen some companies that have struggled because they've had to, as I said, plant the flag and say, this is the device we're going to submit.
Yeah.
And the software that's running it is outdated.
Already obsolete. Yeah.
It's the market. And then and then if you change anyway, that we've always shied away from trying to incorporate software and I would say probably would say AI in many respects because it changes so rapidly.
Great. Well, Brianna, you've seen your fair share of startups that have AI. What's your take on the impact of AI in this space?
So I fall a little bit more in Paul's court with this. I am a bit more of a traditionalist, and I know that the doctors that I've worked with over the years and trying to get things to them and have them look at technologies, they're very slow to move, as we know, with the sales cycles and whatnot. Where I see I want to clearly define. So we use AI, and Dr. Akalon brought this up, is this broad term. And there's really machine learning, which is it has a data set that it just continues to learn from. That's typically a closed data set, especially when it comes to HIPAA compliancy and everything else going on with patients. And then there's generative. And that's where it's making it all up for you. When I think of AI, I think more generative that I do machine learning. And so just if there's any companies here on the line that say they have AI, but they're really just doing machine learning, they should just say that. And there's nothing wrong with it. My biggest question always when it comes to AI is data. Where are you pulling the data? What is this data, right? Because you're only as good as your data and what is being represented there through your data set. And if you're able to plug into the hospitals and have a closed loop circuit that you're working on to protect the patients and their privacy, great. I think there's a couple of opportunities right now that we have in AI that I don't necessarily think is along the line of medical devices. I would see it more in working with pharmaceutical companies to do drug testing and seeing how their drugs work and how that develops and really bringing that to the forefold. I feel like there's steps through the medical industry that we're going to have to take to really get this fully adopted. When I was at Plug and Play, I did see a demo that was really interesting by this company where they call and check up on the patients afterwards. And it is generative AI. And they're essentially having a conversation with what the patients are doing. So it's like, oh, you're home now. Have you been taking your medicine? And it's like they go through and they have a whole conversation and they're able to log the information. And that helps with the labor markets. Once again, you're not working in diagnosis. I think that diagnosis is a big hurdle that we're going to have to get through with AI. And I don't know if with what Dr. Acklong, about you know far more about what the FDA is doing and moving in this space than I do. But diagnosis scares me a bit from the data sets. And as I've heard from some of the companies working on it, they're looking at it more of a co-pilot standpoint.
Diagnosis for generative AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because machine learning is
Yeah.
in pathology and radiology and so forth.
Yeah, I'm talking generative.
Yes,
I'm talking
I
generative
completely
AI diagnosis. Because there have been studies that patients are more comfortable actually talking to robots than they are to people because they actually don't feel like they're being judged. So they'll be more open with the things that they're
pretty
actually.
sad indictment on doctors, I guess.
Well, I think it comes down to society and how people operate and just where their own self-judgment, and they just don't want to be judged by people, which is why people aren't honest about their conditions. So it's everywhere. I think that we as investors need to be incredibly careful and really look to the core of the data of what's being handled and how it all complies with the rules and regs.
Great. And Todd, you're there in the trenches yourself as a CEO. What do you see the impact of AI on the medtech industry?
I have a little bit of a different take that's sort of a little bit off of the three of you, which is I've lived through antisense, siRNA, CRISPR, CAR T, the next diagnostic based upon machine learning, generating patient demographics and biomarkers. I've learned from the next generation of doctors, of robotics and development. But what I see AI doing is changing, going from being scared of someone in a garage, making something new, making a new drug or making a new device, to somebody with a computer and finding something that's a little bit different way of attacking a drug, attacking a device, attacking a surgical procedure. And all of this I see is being fragmented now by many companies that I see. I work in an accelerator on the side, and I see a lot of companies that say, okay, I could do better clinical trials with this repurposed drug or this repurposed device or this repurposed pricing, which means is someone with a computer can go somehow outsmart me and create more value than I'm doing just by creating something physical, creating something biological, and making it happen. So that world of AI and machine learning, I'm an engineer by training. I'm used to math. I'm used to pattern recognition. This is nothing new to me. But I like to say we're in an industry controlled by acts of God and Congress. Pick which one you're going to fight today to get your product approved. AI kind of helps me on both of these angles by looking at its unique data set. Will look at things that I can never ever search in my lifetime, or my teams can never search, and give me something for FDA. So the barrier to entry that AI is creating, or machine learning, or whatever we want to call in the life science industry, is now somebody with a computer or a patient who says, I have this disease, there's no treatment, let me go search for some obscure drug or some obscure procedure, and maybe that will treat me. And that's what I see as transforming life sciences with AI.
Well, that's a good point. Well, for those in the audience, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat box. We'll have a few minutes at the end to go through them. Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.